Ας περάσουμε στο επόμενο μας θέμα. Την Κυριακή 4 Μαρτίου, η ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ Ηνωμένου Βασιλείου, Cyprus Action Team, διοργάνωσε το πρώτο σεμινάριο με θέμα το κυπριακό ζήτημα στο οίκημα της Αδελφότητας. Το άλλο θέμα συζήτησης του σεμιναρίου αφορούσε το πώς οι νεαροί Κύπροι απόδημοι που γεννήθηκαν, μεγάλωσαν και ζουν στη Βρετανία θα μπορούν να βοηθήσουν στην επίτευξη μιας δίκαιης λύσης και για μια ειρηνική συμβίωση στην Κύπρο. Ομιλητές στο σεμινάριο ήταν ο Γενικός Πρόξενος της Κύπρου, κ. Γιώργος Γεωργίου, η ευρωβουλευτής κ. Μαρίνα Γιαννακουδάκη, ο καθηγητής Δόκτωρ Κλέαρχος Κυριακίδης και η δημοσιογράφος Άννα Αβερκίου. Την έναρξη του σεμιναρίου έκανε ο αντιπρόεδρος της ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ Ηνωμένου Βασιλείου και συντονιστής του Cyprus Action Team, Jason-Theo George.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this NEPOMAK seminar on the Cyprus issue. NEPOMAK is a world organisation for young overseas Cypriots, and we cater for our members with a range of cultural, business networking and social events. This event has been organised by the NEPOMAK Cyprus Action Team, the campaigning side of the organisation, and this is the first event of its kind in Britain. May I start by welcoming our speakers here today, George Georgiou, the Consul General of the Republic of Cyprus here in Britain, and the current President of the Consular Corps of London. Mαρίνα Γιαννακουδάκη, a member of the European Parliament for London, who campaigns vigorously for Cyprus at a European level. Dr. Κλέαρχος Κυριακίδης, a qualified solicitor and lecturer at the University of Hertfordshire, who has published countless papers on the Cyprus issue. And finally, Anna Αβερκίου, a media and communications consultant and former BBC journalist for the BBC World Service and producer and news editor of the award-winning programme World Today. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. Now, the motivation behind this seminar stemmed from our existing campaigning activities on the Cyprus issue. NEPOMAK is committed to seeing a peaceful resolution to the division of Cyprus in accordance with the efforts of the Republic to achieve a bizonal, bicommunal federation. As a youth organisation here in Britain, with a large and varied membership, from students to young professionals, NEPOMAK is in a unique position to communicate the desire of young Britons of Cypriot descent to see a peaceful resolution to the Cyprus issue. We speak regularly with British politicians, civil servants, and the mainstream media in expressing our desire for a solution. During today's seminar, after hearing from our distinguished speakers, I am confident that you will all leave enriched and informed of the current position of the peace talks and the steps that we, as young Cypriots living in Britain, could be taking to help bring about peace in Cyprus. Without further delay, Peter Chorelandis, the President of NEPOMAK UK, would like to say a few welcoming words before we move on to hearing from our guest speakers today.
Στη συνέχεια, σύντομο χαιρετισμό έκανε ο πρόεδρος της ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ Ηνωμένου Βασιλείου, Πίτερ Χαραλάμπους. Ας τον παρακολουθήσουμε.
First and foremost, once again, a thank you to George, Marina, Klearcho and Anna on behalf of NEPOMAK UK. We're honoured to have you here and the fact that you've given your time to us as well. As second and third generation young Cypriots, we have the opportunity to hear firsthand today from our speakers who, through their various fields, have helped to promote the Cyprus issue, educate others, both within our community and, of course, spreading the message outside as well, driving forward change. Finally, what I hope we can all get out of this seminar today is a sense of perspective on how each and every one of us can make a difference, firstly, by educating ourselves on Cyprus, how to keep up to date, how to effectively lobby both individually and collectively for Cyprus, so that NEPOMAK UK can engage and empower the young community here in the UK.
Η πρώτη ομιλία στο σεμινάριο έγινε από τον Γενικό Πρόξενο της Κύπρου, κ. Γιώργο Γεωργίου. Ακολουθεί απόσπασμα από την ομιλία του κ. Πρόξενου.
One of the longest standing international problems, which unfortunately still has not found its solution and remains the main preoccupation for the Cypriot diplomacy. And not only, should I say, the Cyprus question runs through every dimension and every level of the public domain in Cyprus, affecting people's lives in many ways. There is no Cypriot that is not touched by the continuous existence of the problem. My generation, to give an example, for the last 38 years, every single day lives with the Cyprus problem. We wake up in the morning listening about the Cyprus problem, and we go to bed at night again listening for the Cyprus problem. From the early morning, the radio stations Cyprus broadcast discussions relating to the Cyprus question. Late at night, the TV channels always include at least one news item directly related to this issue. During the course of the day, the newspapers are full with various commentaries on the Cyprus question, most of them on the front pages. In school, the Cyprus question is more or less part of the curriculum. In the social life, as most of you may know from your own family's experience, politics are always on the agenda, and in particular, the developments on the Cyprus question. Even the Cypriots in the diaspora, of whom many choose to leave their homeland because they became refugees in 1974, are also affected to a significant extent by the Cyprus question. Today's event is a vivid demonstration of this. And of course, it proves that generations like yours, born in this country after the Turkish invasion of 1974, with no other affiliation to Cyprus apart from your immediate family's roots, are still interested and engaged with this issue in a very vigorous manner. Due to the time elapsed since 1974, though, many people tend to forget or to fall for distorted facts surrounding the problem, neglecting its substance, which I would like to remind before I proceed with the main issue of my speech. The Cyprus problem is in its essence an international problem of violation of the international law, namely Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter of the United Nations, which reads, "All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations." Turkey has violated and continues to violate this law. The particular violation resulted in a series of other abuses related to the basic human rights of the Cypriot people. There are 200,000 refugees that forcibly fled their homes, thousands were killed, and hundreds are still missing, amongst them non-combatants, like children, women, and elderly people. 37% of the Cypriot territory, the most fertile, has been lost, as well as the 70% of the island's productive potential. These were the immediate effects at the time and just after the invasion, between July and August 1974. Many other devastating consequences have followed, of which I would like to highlight the absolute dreadful exploitation of Greek Cypriot properties, of which some are used as private residences and others as recreation facilities. The influx of tens of thousands of settlers, to the extent that the native Turkish Cypriot community is in danger of extinction. Much of the rich cultural heritage in the occupied areas, which is part of the world's cultural heritage, has been destroyed and vandalized, and places of worship have been desecrated. The Cyprus question has not affected and does not affect only the Cypriots. It has an effect on very important international issues. Turkey's accession to the European Union is one of them. A second is, of course, the relations between Greece and Turkey, two very important NATO members, and a third is the maintenance of the balance of power in the highly sensitive area of the Eastern Mediterranean, which has now proven to be a vast reserve of hydrocarbons and potentially of oil. Let me also remind you that Cyprus is in close proximity to the combustible Middle East, an area that has been and still is the theater of a complex interaction of international interests. No wonder Cyprus question is still current, worthy of everyone's attention, and definitely in need to be resolved. I will not talk further on the history. I will not elaborate on the implication of the Cyprus question. I will go straight into the main topic, and I want to be very clear that I will talk about the latest developments which cover the period since September 2008, when the new round of the direct negotiations between the leaders of the two communities began. For purposes of analysis, I will separate the two periods from September 2008 to March 2010 and from April 2010 until today. The first period is when Mr. Mehmet Ali Talat was the leader of the Turkish Cypriot community, and the second is when Mr. Dervish Eroglu replaced him as a leader of his community. In September 2008, President Christofias, in his capacity as the leader of the Greek Cypriot community, and the then Turkish Cypriot leader Mehmet Ali Talat, embarked on direct negotiations under the good offices mission of the Secretary General of the United Nations. The basis of the negotiation, and this is important to note, was that the solution of the problem will be a bicommunal, bizonal federation with political equality as described in the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions, for a state with one and single sovereignty, one and single citizenship, and one and single international personality. The negotiation was split into 6 chapters, with the 7th one, the settlers, to be discussed at the conclusion. Those chapters were governance and constitutional issues, economy, European Union, properties, territory, security and guarantees. The two leaders discussed the first 3 chapters, on which they came to some important convergences, without though reaching a full agreement. Some divergences continued to exist, and by no means were the chapters discussed ever considered settled. After all, a rule of the negotiation is that nothing is agreed unless everything is agreed. Our position is that this particular negotiating period could be more fruitful and rewarding, provided that the Turkish Cypriot side was more constructive and fully orientated on the agreed basis of the solution, as described above. Even Mr. Talat, who was presenting himself as a moderate force, could not avoid the temptation to deviate towards elements that were leading to the confederation or loose federation as a final solution for Cyprus. An example of that was his proposal on how the international relations of the future state should be conducted. In his twofold proposal in January 2010 on this particular issue, on the one hand, he suggested that the 2 component units, or states, or whatever they were to be called, should be able to sign international agreements on every field, and on the other hand, he suggested that the central government should sign international, or would be able to sign international agreements only after the permission of the relevant authorities of its 2 component units. This was clearly divisive and was duly rejected. It has to be stressed, however, that the convergences reached by the 2 leaders had created expectations for further progress. These expectations were shared especially amongst the international community. This was just before the beginning of the negotiation of the next and very crucial chapter, the chapter on properties. But, and there is always a but in the Cyprus problem, in April 2010, a voting procedure took place in the occupied part of Cyprus, which brought to the leadership of the Turkish Cypriot community Mr. Dervish Eroglu. It is worth noting, so someone can get a sense for what political views the Turkish Cypriots were voting for, that Mr. Eroglu, during his campaign, advocated for a separate state in the occupied part of Cyprus and never failed to remind voters of the 2 peoples and the 2 states that exist, according to him, on the island.
Στη συνέχεια ακολούθησε η ομιλία της ευρωβουλευτή κυρίας Μαρίνας Γιαννακουδάκη, η οποία ανέπτυξε το θέμα της διατήρησης της κουλτούρας μας, που αφορούσε άμεσα τους νεαρούς Κύπριους που γεννήθηκαν, μεγάλωσαν και ζουν μόνιμα στη Μεγάλη Βρετανία. Ας δούμε ένα απόσπασμα από την ομιλία της.
Has anyone seen my big fat Greek wedding? Has anyone seen it? You must have all seen it, yeah. Can you relate with it in any way at all? Because when I saw it, I thought I was that little girl who was made to eat moussaka at school. And I think that's the challenge you've got here. You're fitting into a multicultural London, but you've got to keep your culture, your Greek roots, and you've got to keep this Greek flame alive in a 2nd and 3rd generation, which is going to become increasingly more difficult as you marry outside, xenos. I mean, I married a xeno. He was Greek from Greece. My son is going to marry a real xeni. She's from Japan. So it's going to get more and more. But it's very important that we keep the Greek going. And someone said, why did you write your brochure in Greek? It's because it's important, and you guys have to put Greek in your literature as well. We have to try and keep it going somehow. I mean, you can't read it very well, but you try. I made my kids go to Greek school, and you'll probably do the same to yours, and good luck to them, because I hated it. And I'm sure you all hated it. But the important thing is, though, that ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ is a social ground for you meeting socially, and also exchanging political ideas, because the political ideas are going to keep the Cyprus issue on the agenda, unless it gets solved beforehand. So I'm going to go into 3 sections. First of all, I'm going to talk about what I do as an MEP and what my role is. Then I'm going to tell you how you can assist me, which is always a good thing. And then I'm going to suggest some things you can do to assist yourselves and make it work. So what do? I'm an MEP for London. For the whole of London, I represent 8 million people, Cypriots, Greek and Turkish Cypriots. So we have to be aware of that. my main job is I'm a spokesman for women issues, and I noticed the girls are sitting on the second row. Not good. Ladies, always push away to the front because they're not going to give it to you. So I'm women's spokesman, and I'm also a spokesman for health issues. So that's really the crunch of what I do mainly. Because I am of Greek Cypriot origin, I am very conscious of the fact that I can be labelled a one-issue MEP. If I talk too much about Cyprus, then everything else I do will be put on the side and people will not take me seriously. And if you're planning on going into political careers, you have to bear in mind that you are British from Greek origin and you have to concentrate on all areas that affect the UK. So I'm very conscious of my work to do with Cyprus, but then again, I am of Cypriot origin, so obviously I want to do as much as I can. Which is why I belong to two Greek groups in Parliament. The first one I'll just mention very quickly, it's called FYROM, which is to do with the former Republic of Macedonia, former Republic of Yugoslavia, which is, they're trying to get the Macedonian name put in, but we're trying to keep it off. And that's really to help the Greeks. And the next thing I do, which is my main area for Cyprus, is I'm a member of the high-level contact group for Turkish Cypriot relationships. Turkish Cypriot relationships. Now, this was formed when Cyprus became a member of the EU in 2004, whenever. Shows. Part of the agreement of Cyprus getting into the EU was because their MEPs were going to be Cypriot, they had to have this contact group which would keep an eye on what the Turkish Cypriots wanted in the occupied zone. So our function is to really go over to Cyprus and to have speakers and see what's going on and find out where the talks are going and how we can make sure that the Turkish Cypriot problems are not left behind. And they have got a lot of problems because they are also living in an occupied part of Cyprus. Whichever way you do it, they are not Turkish residents, they are Turkish Cypriots. And a lot of them don't want the Turkish army there, they don't want the settlers, and they feel that they're being thrown out of their country. In fact, one of my visits, one of them said to me, I'm just a Cypriot who speaks Turkish. Another one said, if you don't do something to help us soon, we'll have to leave. We can't stay here with these Turkish invaders. So one of the things I do in the high-level contact group is I'm very conscious, and I keep it on the agenda, that Cyprus is occupied. And there are some people on the contact group who will not accept that Cyprus is occupied. When we go over, we meet with the president. We meet with all the political parties, both the Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. We attend something that is organised, I think, once a month by the Slovakian ambassador, who calls in the political parties from both Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, and they discuss issues and how they feel, and they try and come up with a common resolution, which was a drastic situation. They're arguing about a simple word. It's the different parties which are trying to get together, and which is always a difficult thing. We meet with Aroglu and his team. We meet with the UN and Alexander Down Under, who his perception of the Greek problem never ceases to amaze me. We need to do something about him, as I've suggested already. What we actually do, that we produce a report. Now, this report is actually now with a Conference of Presidents, so I can't actually talk about it. But when it comes through, if you want, we can bring it here and you can look at it and we can discuss it, because that will give you an analysis from the European Union's perspective of what's going on with all the different areas and how the different stakeholders are playing. Because I am of Greek origin, obviously, the Turkish Cypriot authorities look at me with some suspicion. In fact, when I first went to Parliament, I had a little visit from some very tall, hunky men, not very pleasant looking. There were about 5 of them who came to my office. They wanted to see me. And the first thing they did when they came in, they gave me their business cards, and they said, what do they call themselves? Northern Turkish Republic or something. I looked at it and I said, well, I'm sorry, this doesn't exist. So if you're coming to see me from here, I can't see you. I'm terribly sorry. If you're coming to see me as a Turkish Cypriot, my door is open. So they took their cards away and they said, we're here as Turkish Cypriots. No problem, sit down. And basically they had about half an hour in the office trying to suss me out, trying to find out where I stood. Well, I said to them, I'm neutral, I'm a British MEP, and I'm here to look after everyone's interests who are Cypriot. But it got to the stage when I mentioned the missing persons, for example, they said, have you got a person missing? Well, no, I haven't. But it's a humanitarian issue. So it's quite difficult on the high-level contact group because they look at you, yeah, you know that word? You know, as if you're sort of... last time I was there, we were at the meeting with Eroglu and his team, and my team, all of us lot, and he gave his take on everything, which was very different to the Cypriot take, I must admit. And at the end, we all have a chance to speak. Now, I knew that whatever I would say, they would have taken the wrong way. So I did what was the next best thing. And at the time, there had been a problem with homosexuality, and they still have the law there. So I approached him on that, and I asked him about human rights. And that was an area where he couldn't walk away from, and we could actually come to some agreement. Later on, it followed by some letters. He still hasn't repealed the law. I'm still after him. But the point is, you've got to divert it and send a curved ball, but still be on the playing field sometimes, as British politicians with a Greek background. So the high-level contact group, we will talk at another time, because I can't really say a lot of what we're doing because it's still at a confidential stage. When the report's printed, by all means, contact me. What else can I do in Parliament, the European Parliament? Well, as you know, we've done a written declaration, and you were there, and we got it through, and that was great. And a written declaration is equivalent to an early day motion in the British Parliament, and it's something that Parliament says it's its wish. We did that on missing persons. There was one that just got passed on Famagusta, which is brilliant.
Στο σεμινάριο συμμετείχε επίσης και ο καθηγητής Δόκτωρ Κλέαρχος Κυριακίδης από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Χάρφοσαρ. Ο κύριος καθηγητής τόνισε το πόσο σημαντική είναι η συμμετοχή των νεαρών Κύπριων στα πολιτικά δρόμενα της χώρας που ζουν, αλλά και πόσο σημαντική είναι η άποψή τους σε διάφορα θέματα που αφορούν ακαδημαϊκές αλλά και άλλες σχετικές συζητήσεις που διοργανώνονται. Ακολουθεί απόσπασμα από την ομιλία του καθηγητή Δόκτωρ Κλέαρχου Κυριακίδη.
When I was 18, it was the 1988 United States presidential election, and the Democrats selected as their nominee the governor of Massachusetts, who was called Michael Dukakis, and he was of Greek origin. And I remember watching Newsnight, I think it was at the time, with Peter Snow, and there was a gentleman from the South who appeared on the program to be interviewed. And remember, the South was the capital of segregation in America, the capital of racial politics. And this gentleman proclaimed that in the United States of America, no politician with a surname which included 2 Ks could ever expect to become president of the United States of America. This was a quarter of a century ago, way before Barack Obama. And that had me thinking, because I had 2 Ks in my name. I chose not to go into politics as such, but I'm very pleased to see that Marina has been elected to Parliament with 2 Ks in her surname. But that shows you, I have more than 2, but that shows you really what you can achieve. In this country, whatever its flaws and defects, you can reach the top in politics, you can reach the top in government, you can reach the top in business, you can reach the top in art. Whatever field of work you wish to go into, you can reach the top. And that's something that we've benefited from over the past quarter of a century. When I was growing up in the 70s, it was the era in which there was a great deal of discrimination faced by Greeks, blacks, Asians and others, purely on the basis of their race or religion. And we've benefited from the change in the political climate in this country. So I wanted to open with that thought. I've been invited to really say two main things today. One is offer a few thoughts on the Cyprus question, and then a few thoughts as to how you can become involved in politics. I haven't become involved in party politics, but I've certainly been involved in the political system I saw the foothills of Her Majesty's Armed Forces as a civilian research fellow, as an academic at the Royal Air Force Staff College, as it then was, and I was involved also in an academic workshop that was overseen by the Chief of the Air Staff, the service head of the Royal Air Force. I was also involved in tutoring the armed forces for 13 years on an occasional basis. So I've seen the armed forces, and by extension the Ministry of Defence and the British government, from that vantage point. I've also practiced in the legal profession, and I've become a very active member of the representative side of the legal profession through the Law Society nationally, and more specifically through 2 local law societies. So I've seen how the legal profession functions, and I haven't reached the top by any stretch of the imagination, but I can at a moment's notice make contact with people at the top of the legal profession, and that's given me an opportunity to kick the government on several occasions and expose what we regard in the profession as inappropriate policies by all the parties, as it happens. So I've been involved in politics in that way, and thirdly, as an academic, I've been able to contribute through writing and through lectures to public discourse. I've tended to write about Cyprus and the Eastern Mediterranean and then switch. I've written about the Office of Attorney General, for example, the Office of Attorney General here. I've contributed to the discussions and debates about the role of the law officers of this country. I've also discussed the role that law should, and the rule of law should play in our political system. So over the years I've deliberately written about Cyprus, but I've also swung away and written about things that are of more mainstream interest to this country. And that, in a way, is a development of the point that Marina has just made. Anyway, let me just go through quickly the spade is a spade one. On the Cyprus question, it's important to just have our terminology correct, because it is so easy to abuse language. I begin in this paper by going back to George Orwell. George Orwell spoke of the importance of restating the obvious. This was back in 1939, when the dictators in Europe were trying to stretch words beyond their natural meaning in order to make a political point. And George Orwell reminded us that it is dangerous to abuse words, and he spoke of us descending into an age in which 2 and 2 will make 5 when the leader says so. Words are important. Words carry meaning, and as a lawyer, I spend my life, and I did when I was in practice, spend my working days playing with words, using words, deploying words, and ultimately it's important that we use correct terminology. We're all familiar with the mantra that's repeatedly trotted out by the Turkish government, of whichever political persuasion it happens to be, that in 1974 Turkish forces landed on the island of Cyprus and they embarked upon a peace operation. Now that's a mantra that continues to be trotted out. We're also familiar with the Whitehallese, if I may use that expression, the words that the weasel words used by British ministers to try and camouflage the reality of what occurred in 1974. That's why we repeatedly hear British ministers talk about the events of 1974 or the military action of 1974. The other one that they use, the hostilities of 1974. Somehow, and for some reason, British ministers can't bring themselves to refer to what occurred in 1974 as an invasion, and they can't bring themselves to refer to the consequences of that invasion as an occupation. Now, the words are important here because I've just already mentioned the Second World War. The Second World War amounted to a campaign of armed aggression by Germany, Italy, and other countries. Those countries invaded and occupied territories. In some respects, and in some cases, the Germans in particular flushed out of the territory they occupied the people who were the permanent inhabitants. They engaged in what's commonly referred to as ethnic cleansing. As far as the Jews were concerned, they targeted the Jews on the basis of their race and religion, and not only uprooted them from their homes, but incarcerated them in camps and exterminated them in their millions. And as a result of what occurred in the Second World War, the victorious powers, which were led by the United Kingdom, the United States, the Soviet Union, and even though it had been occupied for much of the war, France, as well as China, decided that the rule of law would triumph over the rule of the gun. And in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, a series of international treaties were unfurled to underline the primacy of the rule of law. These included the United Nations Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, the Genocide Convention, the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions. Regrettably, in 1974 and on previous occasions, those treaties were disregarded and violated by Turkey in particular.
Τέλος, σύντομη ομιλία έκανε συμπατριώτησά μας και δημοσιογράφος Άννα Αβερκίου. Ας την παρακολουθήσουμε.
My grandfather came over in the 30s, met my grandmother during the war in a factory making aircraft parts in Birmingham. And it was a real love story. I think they ran away to Scotland and got married. And I'm the grandchild, one of the grandchildren. On the other side, my father came over in the 50s, when he was 14. So I'm one of the ones that doesn't speak Greek. And I actually grew up in Cockfosters thinking myself as English. And I learned very early on that being female and Cypriot were not a good combination, especially with the way that my brain worked, and I always wanted to be a journalist. I loved politics, and I thought I was going to go into politics until I actually did become a journalist, and I'm sorry to say that I actually got very disillusioned with politics. But I was very privileged when I became a journalist as a trainee on the Enfield Gazette. Michael Portillo had just become MP, and the last time I saw him, he was Defence Secretary and I was working in Bosnia. And he looked at me and I went Enfield Gazette, and we sort of followed each other's careers. Obviously, he did much better than I did. I made a documentary in 1990 about the relatives of the missing. And that was a really interesting experience. I'd managed to get a production company involved. I'd got all sorts of promises from the committee for the missing. We got to Cyprus and we were refused access to everything. And we made the documentary. It went down well, but I decided that was it. Never work with children, animals, or Greeks. But having said that, I'm aware of my Greek roots. And when I went to Woodhouse Sixth Form College, a lot of Greek Cypriot students there, and I got more into the sort of issue and have been dipping in and out of the issue over the years. I've covered the story as the resident Greek in the newsroom, so I was probably the only one at the time. I was the one that used to get sent out to Cyprus to cover the stories, so I've covered missile crises and fires, all sorts of things. And I'll say now, the biggest Cyprus problem at the moment is that nobody's listening. And that's a real problem. And it doesn't matter how many times I'd suggest stories, the only way you're going to get the news interested here is if it involves the British bases, British expats, or holiday makers. That's it. You know, the World Service, much, much better about covering the issue, but we'll come on to that in the workshop. Really interesting to hear what everyone's had to say. During my career, it was quite interesting. I'd get calls from the Cyprus High Commission, and I'd get calls from the representative from the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and I knew then I'd done a good story because I'd got both sides down pat. And they both knew what we were going to say, and they both knew each other's arguments. But they had to make their sort of views felt. So it's actually the biggest problem. I mean, words are really, really important. And as someone who's made a living out of words, I can't stress now more than ever, you've got to think of a new form of words to actually get this issue over. And we'll come to the workshop, a new way of doing things. I think actually at this stage, that's really all I want to say, because what I'm going to do with you by the end of this afternoon is hopefully have challenged you. I am going to be the devil's advocate here, and some of you who are doing law, hopefully you'll enjoy some of the debate. I'm hoping the cameras will be switched off for this, because we'll see what comes out of that. And by the end of it, as an organisation, you'll have some ideas about how to move things forward and get it into the media.